You stick your hands up if you've got a question for Brian. Right in the middle there with the gorgeous blue jacket on.
I read recently an article in the newspaper that was basically saying in our lifetime there's actually a possibility of colonizing Mars. Do you really think that's a likely possibility?
I hope. It's certainly a possibility that we'll go there. I mean, one of the people we met in Wonders of the Solar System, actually, was the biologist who I took an ice core with, if you remember, in Iceland, and found little microbes in it, a guy called Richard Hoover. Now, he's been at NASA since the 60s, and he knew Werner von Braun personally. And it was astonishingly interesting to sit there and chat to him over a beer in our little shed in Iceland. Many long, dark nights we spent there, about NASA in the 60s. And they had a plan to go to Mars by the mid-1980s based on Saturn V technology, so the technology that they used to go to the moon, which is amazingly clever, actually. They were going to get 2 Saturn V rockets and use the middle portions of them and literally tie them together and spin it so that you got artificial gravity. And they would send that thing to the moon. And it's clever because you get artificial gravity on the cheap, but also you have a redundancy built in. So if you get a meteorite impact, for example, that damages one of them, then everyone can move to the other one. So you've got 2 spacecraft there. And they absolutely convinced they could have done that by the mid-1980s. So there's no reason other than political will that we didn't go to Mars in the 80s. We could go now if we wanted. Colonizing it, I suppose you'd have to ask why you would do it, really. So my view would be it would be an astonishingly expensive thing to do to try and colonize Mars in the short term. But to go there would be astonishingly cheap in many ways. I mean, we know that I can't remember the exact figure, but I think Apollo was shown to provide something like a 10-to-1 return. I can't quite remember, but it was something like for every $1 spent on Apollo, 10 came back into the US economy. And that was from the stimulus that you gave it in terms of engineering efforts, in terms of jobs that were created, and in terms of inspiration, which shouldn't be underestimated. The number of kids that went into science and engineering and contributed to the economy as a result of the excitement of Apollo was large, almost immeasurable. So yeah, the case for Mars is very strong, in my opinion. Colonizing it a bit longer, I think.
How long does it take, with a normal space rocket to get from here to Mars?
I don't know what the exact figure is. It's of order a year, I think. Someone might know. It's 9 months a year, I think. I mean,
right.
You could...
You wouldn't want to leave the grill on, would you?
No.
That would be awful. Down here, this gentleman in the black...
Hi, thanks for the talk. So every day in the media, we're seeing more interesting stuff coming out from the Large Hadron Collider. What particular aspects are you looking forward to when they start ramping up the energies beyond 3.5 TeV?
Yeah, so the LHC, the Large Hadron Collider, is currently running at half energy, which is the collision to 7 TeV in our language. That's tera electron volts. I'll give you a definition.
Please.
Well, no, you can.
Yeah, hang on. Let me feel this.
An electron volt is the energy an electron gets if you accelerate it through a potential difference of 1 volt. So a 9-volt battery would give you a 9 electron volt beam. So the LHC runs at 3.5 tera electron volts per beam, which is 3.5 million electron volts. So it's like a 3.5 million volt battery on each beam. So at that energy, that might be enough, is the first thing to say, because it's still 3.5 times the energy of anything else that we've ever had. And one of the key things we're looking for is the origin of something called electroweak symmetry breaking, which in standard language is the time in the universe's life when mass appeared for the first time. So literally, if you look at your hand, it's made up of protons and neutrons, which are made up of quarks and electrons that are going around the atoms. All those things have mass. And we're very sure that at around 1/1000th of a second after the universe began, something happened. It was something called a phase transition, but something happened such that some particles got mass and some didn't. And the LHC is already operating in that energy regime now. So one of the answers can be the Higgs Boson, which many people have heard of. That's a theory for what does that. If that's true, then you find Higgs bosons, and you can find them with the energy we've got now, probably. If not, then whatever the mechanism is, you will see it because we know where to look. So that's certainly in the planned discoveries, as it were, of the LHC. I think that's the most exciting. And you may, if you need the extra energy, then the plan is to shut down in about a year's time, upgrade certain protection systems, and then run at 7. But actually, I could talk forever about this. It's actually running very well now. It's exceeding our expectations in terms of numbers of collisions per second, massively at the moment. So there's a temptation not to play around with it and just keep taking data, which is what we're doing, and keep looking. The last thing I'd say is that whilst that is the most exciting, so the origin of mass is probably the most exciting thing you could, in the planned discoveries. Things like supersymmetry, which is a theory that may provide the answer to the question, what is dark matter? So what is a lot of the universe made of? Those things are also sort of there on the agenda, and in some sense easier to see than the origin of mass. So it is actually very exciting at the moment. There's a huge amount of data that we've got there.
But you've already, just the other week, you recreated the moments after the Big Bang, didn't you? With what is this quark ion plasma or something?
Yeah, you can run the LHC. What we're talking about is running with protons, so hydrogen nuclei. You put those in, and you circulate the beams 11,000 times a second. They go around the 27 kilometers, and you collide them together. You can also put nuclei, complex nuclei in there. So we've been running with lead nuclei in there, which it was also designed to do. And that creates this thing called a quark-gluon plasma, as you said, which is like a soup of quarks and gluons, so subatomic particles. So it looks very much like the universe did about a millionth of a second after the Big Bang. And that's, in a way, different physics, actually. It's almost a precursor of nuclear physics, whereas what we also do there is particle physics, which is looking for the Higgs particle and all that stuff. But the LHC is a multi-purpose machine and designed to be so.
And you can smash anything up in there. The scientists on Saturday nights do it with Fiat Cinquecentos. Have a lot of fun. Another question from the man in the check shirt. I've got one of them shirts. Very nice.
I'll say nothing.
Sorry, just about the most awkward position. You briefly mentioned during the talk then that you've got a new series coming out. I wonder if you could share maybe something about that? Maybe one of the interesting places that you went and filmed for the new series?
Sure, yeah. It's called Wonders of the Universe. It was actually commissioned before Wonders of the Solar System came out. It was going to be called Universal. So it's different, actually, in some ways, in its scope. It was conceived as a program about the laws of physics, essentially, and it still is that. So that there are 4 programs. One is about light, one is about gravity, but then one is about called stellar nucleosynthesis, so essentially about this story of the origin of the elements. Because back at the Big Bang, then we know that after about a minute, maybe 2 minutes after the universe began, the universe was entirely hydrogen and helium, about 75% hydrogen, 25% helium. That ratio actually is one of the key pieces of evidence that the Big Bang theory is correct. So after that, then the heavier elements need to be created by stars in the universe. And so one of the programs is about the story of that. And one of them is about time, but specifically about thermodynamics. So that's the area of physics that deals with why things happen and what's the ultimate fate of the universe. So it's a wonders in scope. As we visited wonderful places, as you asked. We filmed in Kathmandu in Nepal. We filmed in Patagonia and in Peru. We've actually also focused on civilizations as well. We wanted some kind of grounding in the earliest origin of ideas. So actually one of the most fascinating, we filmed recently in New Mexico in a place called Chaco Canyon. The reason we went there was because there's a record on a rock of supernova, the last bright supernova in our galaxy that went off on July 4th, 1054 AD. And we know that because the Chinese saw it and documented it beautifully. But in Chaco Canyon, the Anasazi people, or the Chacoan people who lived there at the time, also made a painting of this supernova. And it's almost certain it is of that for various reasons. You can simulate the sky as it was back then, and the map is rather good. But it was remarkable because we found, I didn't know this, but that civilization only existed in terms of building things from about 1030 to 1130 AD. And they built massive mansions, these things, 600-room houses that they built. But there's bizarrely no evidence of them living in the houses. So they seem to have had some ceremonial purpose, maybe a religious purpose. And they're also aligned with various interesting things in the sky, like the North Star and the places where the sun rises on the equinoxes and the solstices. So it was there's quite a bit of that come into the series as well, just because it's interesting. We found it interesting. So it's a story about the wider universe, how we got here, how we appeared in the universe, and the fate of the universe.
And do you cover the freakier parts? Again, scientific terminology. Black holes, neutron stars.
Yeah.
Just give me a nugget about neutron stars.
We do neutron stars because they're part of the life cycle of stars. The neutron stars are astonishing because what you find, the reason that we don't collapse, you can ask the question, why is matter stable? Because again, we've got gravity pulling things in. And actually, until the 50s or 60s, it wasn't shown, it wasn't proved that matter's stable. There was a man called Freeman Dyson who initially proved it. He was still alive, a very famous physicist, worked with Richard Feynman for many years. And he showed that it's actually a thing called the exclusion principle that makes matter stable, which is a quantum mechanical effect that tells you that electrons can't be in technically the same state. So you could read for that the same place.
Yeah.
So when you've got electrons around an atom, they stay spaced out because it's forbidden for them to be in exactly the same quantum state or place, essentially. But what happens if you continue, so that's the thing that keeps us up, and it's the ultimate reason there's this sort of force that keeps you from falling through the ground. So it's a quantum mechanical thing. But eventually, if you crush something so much under gravity that you're just really trying to force those electrons on top of each other, they give up being electrons. So rather than go into the same state, they collapse onto the protons in the nucleus and turn into neutrons. And then you get a ball of neutrons that stays up because neutrons don't want to be in the same place either, but they can be a lot closer than electrons can because they're heavier, essentially. So you get this next stage in the collapse in the stability of matter called the neutron star. But quite amazingly, that wasn't shown to be true, that story, until the 60s and 70s, actually. Freeman Dyson actually famously said that he proved it with this ridiculous bit of maths that he says he doesn't understand now and nobody's understood since.
I forgot
someone found a simpler proof later. But he's not very proud of his original proof because it's just nonsense. I think there's some scientists amongst you, there's some number that you have to show is not infinite. So you have to calculate this stuff and you have to come up with a number that isn't infinity to show that matter's stable. And he kind of got something like 10 to the 83, which is 1 with 83 noughts after it, which is fine, it's not infinity. But the real number is something like 9 or something. So he was way off, but he did prove it. It's just
an anomaly
story.
in his maths.
Yeah.
But just very quickly on that, a collapsed neutron star can be about the size of Manhattan or something like that, but have this enormous gravitational pull.
So these things have got the mass of the sun, and they're 10 kilometers across.
That's ridiculous.
A
spoonful of a neutron star would weigh how much?
Yeah, it's an Everest-sized thing. The other great fact, I think we use it in the show, is that if you got every human on the Earth, and squashed them to the density of a neutron star, then they would fit inside a sugar cube, which is so it's
That's a good one.
Yeah.
I think we've got time for one more question. I saw you first, this tall gentleman at the back with the glasses.
Hello, and thank you for your talk, Brian. I've 2 questions, one of which you might want to answer, so you can select from the 2. The first one is, if you could travel back in time to Barnes at about the time George Osborne was picking up his O-level results, what would you tell him? Or, if you'd rather not answer that question...
I could say it's impossible to travel back in time, but that would be a cop-out.
I said if you could.
But you can't.
Imagine, I don't know, you can travel faster than C and that whole cone thing, whatever.
I can answer that one if you want.
Yeah.
I mean, I think interestingly, politically, I think a battle was won with science funding in the budget because it was kept flat, which is actually relative to virtually everything else is a win. I mean, it will decline by about 8% over the next 3 years because of inflation, but there it was kept what's called flat cash. And I think that, although I still think that because our economic future depends on our prowess in science and engineering, that's rather the least we could have expected. It does tell you that an argument was won with the Treasury, and an argument was made. I mean, particularly David Willits, actually, who's I think going to be a superb science minister. He won an argument there, undoubtedly, because until quite close to the spending review, there were going to be cuts in the science budget. And when you think that, just to give you one figure, about something like 43% of our economy is what's called knowledge intensive. It's based on knowledge intensive services and industry. And we invest, 3.3 billion a year in the science budget, which is a tiny amount. Then it's a big gamble to cut the science budget. So I think George bought it to some extent. The test now will be, when the country recovers, is that confidence in science maintained, and do we then begin to grow our science budgets again?
Because we are primarily now a knowledge-based economy as opposed to a manufacturing-based economy, aren't we? So.
On the way to 50%.
Yeah.
Although a lot of that is, I mean, there's Rolls-Royce, AstraZeneca, there's people, so you know, that's included. It's what you need scientists and engineers for.
Yeah. Engineers, gotta love them.
Well, we could take one more question. Can we just one? Because you were dying to ask a question.
Go on.
You never go.
Tiny one.
Just a quick one.
Tiny one. Just a tiny one.
Hi. What do you think happened before the Big Bang?
That's a great question.
Good one.
See?
Good one. Got him on the ropes now.
I've run out of time.
Looking forward to this.
It's actually a brilliant question because the standard answer to that, which is correct in a sense, according to Einstein, is that space and time began at the Big Bang. Right, so that's the answer that you always will hear given. So if time and space began at the Big Bang, then there's no business in asking what happened before because there was no time, right? But that sounds like a cop-out. It isn't. It's the orthodox view. But there's a friend of mine, actually, Neil Turok, who's a very famous cosmologist who's now in Canada. And he works on theories where the universe has been around forever because there are extra dimensions in the universe. So rather than there just being 3 dimensions of space, like there are in this room, and one of time, you can have other ones. And then you could imagine our world, our 4-dimensional world, essentially, as a sheet like that floats around in a bigger universe. And you can imagine lots of these sheets floating around. And then what happens, and they've got vague calculations of this, what happens when they bump together is that they get hot, so they get heated up, and then they separate again, and they expand very quickly. And actually, the observational evidence that we have about the early universe, what we know is that it was very hot and very dense a long time ago, and very highly ordered relative to today. And then it's expanded and cooled and become less ordered ever since. And that works in these theories. So what we could be seeing as the hot, dense phase in our history, 13.7 billion years ago, could have been a collision between 2 of these sheets. So that would be one example of a theory that tries to address that question.
And is string theory intertwined with that theory, or is that just completely separate? Is that more of a quantum?
That's not a string theory. The string theories have extra dimensions in them by definition. They all operate in 10 plus 1 dimensions or whatever they do. But that doesn't require that. There are extra dimension theories that exist outside of string theory as well, and that's one of them.
So when people see ghosts, Brian, is it possible that what it is, in fact, is just 2 dimensions crossing like that, and you see like maybe an old woman with no head walking across your landing? That could just be 2 dimensions crossing like that?
No.
Thank you. Forget that one. Okay, listen, you've been an absolutely wonderful audience, but I would very much like you to put your hands together and give a massive round of applause to the great Professor Brian Cox. Thank you.